So T1 as an organization won their fifth world championship this morning, along with Faker winning his fifth individually as well. I think a lot of people are saying, and I would agree with them, that this is the greatest roster in League of Legends history of Zeus, Owner, Faker, Guma, and Keria, going to three world finals in a row and winning two of them would cement their spot atop the all-time rosters. But this series in particular was very strange to me. It went the full 5 games, but I think the first 3 games especially were probably the strangest in World Finals history. All three of the first three were complete stomps. BLG stomped game 1, T1 the same in game 2, and BLG again in game 3. It wasn't until game 4 that we got a really exciting, intense back and forth game, and then that also followed up in game 5 as well, being very competitive and very, very exciting. So it just started out as a really strange series in my opinion and kind of anticlimactic. After game 1, I had a feeling that T1 was just kind of going to fall flat, but obviously they ended up turning it around. Honestly, the first 3 games were so confusing to me, I don't really even have a lot to mention analytically of those 3 games. They were just very strange and very one-sided, each of them, so I'm not going to talk a whole lot about that. But I do want to focus in on the Game 5 draft here because I think this was by far T1's best draft of the series, and it really couldn't have come at a better time heading into Game 5. So let's go ahead and jump right into that. So one thing I was confused about this series was how T1 handled the Jax situation. Obviously, Bin is insane on this character, but I was a bit confused on why T1, in a couple games, they left it open or they banned it. They left it open first picked. I was confused because against Gen G, Zeus showed that he can very comfortably play Gragas into the Jax, and it's actually a winning matchup. Obviously, Jax has really hard counters that no one's going to play, so we'll just leave that alone. But Zeus has shown that he can easily pick the Gragas and be completely fine into the Jax, regardless of who's playing the Jax. And that's exactly what he does here in Game 5. They open with an immediate counter in top lane, which is absolutely the correct thing to do. Gragas into Jax is a winning matchup, and Gragas also matches pretty well the scaling of Jax in a side lane, and also has pretty significant teamfight impact as well. So they go ahead and rotate Galio if it's locked in here on first rotation red side, which is very interesting. I think that since Sylas had been such a high priority pick this series, I think T1 was trying to bait BLG into picking Sylas here, saying that the Galio is going to win that lane matchup, but BLG don't end up picking it, I think. So that's a bit of a nice fake out, or predict rather, from T1. Kind of calling BLG's trump card and saying, you're not going to pick Sylas into this, even though Knight's very good at the champion. The Galio really neutralizes a lot of what Sylas wants to do in the lane phase, as well as in the teamfight stage. And then BLG go ahead and 2-3 Kai'Sa and Ahri. I think this is pretty good. Ahri is not going to ever kill the Galio in the lane phase, but she's obviously just a pretty strong, in general, versatile pick that Knight has proven he's very comfortable on. I think that's a big theme here in Game 5. It's really the goal in Game 5, high-pressure scenarios like this, to make sure your players are as comfortable as possible heading into the game. It's the last game of the year. It's do or die. This is it. This is the last game that you're going to play this year with this roster, most likely. So you really want your players to be as comfortable as possible. That's why we're seeing mostly comfort picks for each of these players here. And then T1 go ahead and counter the Kai'Sa with the Xayah pick, which is pretty interesting. I think picking Xayah so early is pretty risky because Xayah is very situational. I'd say probably the most situationally picked ADC in the game because she really only does well into dive. But obviously, Jax, Kai'Sa, and Ahri are all pretty short range and all typically go forward in some type of forward dive action. So Xayah, I can understand why that would have value, and I think considering BLG's last rotation, it will also get value considering that. But Gumayusi obviously is just very comfortable on the pick, probably his best champion, and so that's probably the main reason that they have for picking that. Through the first phase, I think that T1's pretty ahead. They have winning top lane matchup, they have a neutralized mid lane matchup where Faker can probably roam more effectively on the Galio, and they have a comfort pick in the bot lane. And even though Kai'Sa does pretty well into the Xayah in the lane, I think, individual bot lane matchup doesn't really end up mattering a whole lot in competitive because the 2v2 doesn't really fight a whole lot, and supports end up roaming. So the 1v1 bot lane matchup doesn't really end up mattering a whole lot. T1 going R4 Poppy. I think this is pretty interesting because it's a support jungle flex here. It's also really good into pretty much everything that BLG have picked so far. So I actually really like that pick here. I wouldn't be surprised though if BLG kind of just know it's going support, because if you have triple tank and topside, you're kind of lacking damage in that sense. So I think it's pretty safe to say here that the Poppy's going support, and you want to counter that support with something of your own on BLG's last rotation. They go and lock in the Jarvan here, which is pretty interesting. I'm not a huge fan of this, one, because you're playing into Poppy, two, because you're playing into Xayah. Like I said earlier, Xayah thrives into champions that dive into her because of that ultimate and her feather pullback. And Jarvan is doing exactly that, along with the Rel on last pick. So really, BLG is playing into exactly what T1 want them to do here. BLG really want to function as a death ball dive comp, and T1 is countering that pretty well here. Gragas can break up the fight really well. You have Galio ult that can come down. You have Xayah, which does really well into these kinds of comps. And you have Poppy, who can stop pretty much everyone's engage over on the side of BLG. The Xin Zhao does come in on R5 to counter jungle. I think it's a good pick into the Jarvan because it's going to win the 1v1 jungle matchup at every stage of the game. It's a bit of an oddball pick in the grand scheme of the comp, but I think it serves its purpose just fine in terms of an early game skirmishing jungler, because the grubs were such high priority this series. Xin Zhao is going to be really effective at taking those. So overall, Game 5, T1 had a huge draft win. Thematically and in individual lane matchups, they have winning mid, they have winning top, and they have, kind of just a neutral bot lane where the supports are probably going to roam, but Poppy's always going to have the advantage over Rel just because of that grounding interaction. So really great draft in Game 5 from T1. No wonder they were able to come out on top in this Game 5. Congratulations to them winning their 5th world title. Congrats to the GOAT Faker winning your 5th one as well, man. Absolutely huge. Thanks for watching. See you next time.